Thank you so much. Hello, food lovers. How are you this evening? Welcome to Seasonal Roots Holiday Prep with Chef Nikk. It is my pleasure to be here with you all tonight as we are a week from Thanksgiving and we are approaching the holiday season. We are all looking for a few different things to cook, so I'm excited to show you a couple things tonight. I have been in the hospitality industry for over 20 years. I went to culinary school, so I started out as a chef, cooking in restaurants, and then I took my talents to hotels, eventually to convention centers. I've also been a restaurant manager, a bar manager, a director of banquets. I've done a little bit of everything as it relates to food and beverage in the hospitality industry. About 2 years ago, I started a full-time catering business and private chef service. So I'm excited to promote Chef Nick's Creations as well. And I also work part-time with Seasonal Roots as one of our delivery drivers. So excited about that. So let's jump right in. Let's get started. So the first dish we're going to do tonight is the sauteed kale. And what I've done here, I have two different kinds of kale to show you. So the first one is what they call Tuscan Kale. And Tuscan Kale is not quite as curly on the ends. It's kind of a curly leaf all the way around. It's a thinner leaf, so it cooks a lot faster, and the stalk isn't as thick as regular kale. This is your garden variety kale that you would find in your Seasonal Roots box or at your local grocery store. It has the curly edges around, and it has a much thicker stalk at the bottom. So the stalk is really what takes so long to cook, because you want it to be tender, you don't want it to be chewy. So that's the part of it that we try to cut out as we're cutting the kale. So I already have some kale that I have begun to chop, but I want to just show you how I've done it. So as you can see, here's a kale leaf, and you can see the stalk down the spine right there. So what I do is I layer the leaves together, like so, and then I cut a V right down the middle to cut out the bottom part of the stalk. So just like that. And as you can see, it opens it up so that you can pull the stalk out. And you can just pop it in half and it'll come right out. And that just makes it easier so that when you go to cook it, it cooks more evenly and it doesn't take quite as long. Once I've done that, I put the leaves together and then I roll them up. But I roll them lengthwise this way. Can you guys see that? And then from there, I cut long strips like this. So if you guys hear other voices, I have two good friends here with me tonight, and they're reading the questions so that I can see them, because I can't see them. Here is the kale that I've already cut, and I've already washed it. It's really important for you to wash your kale. I know sometimes when you buy it from the store, or even when you get it in your box, it looks like, you know what, it could be washed off already. But you still want to wash it off. There's usually like dirt or sand that's still kind of caught in the leaves. And you want to make sure that you get all of that out before you start to cook. So I'm just going to add that together because I've already cleaned it ahead of time. And we're just going to put that to the side. The other thing is the tomatoes. So I have 3 different kinds of tomatoes here. I have a beefsteak tomato. And beefsteak tomatoes are pretty big. They're usually pretty solid and firm. These are great for slicing, canning, and for sauces. These are tomatoes on the vine. They're a little bit smaller than the beefsteak tomato. And they're pretty all-purpose tomatoes. You can pretty much use them for anything. They're not super sweet, but they're still pretty juicy. So they're good for canning, they're good for sauces, and they're still large enough that you could slice for a sandwich or what have you. The good thing is that supposedly, if they stay on the vine, they last a lot longer. I'm not sure if I believe that or not. My final tomato is what we call Roma tomatoes, or sometimes you see them as plum tomatoes. These are much smaller and much sweeter than the beefsteak or the tomatoes on the vine. So these are tomatoes that I'm using tonight. However, if you have beefsteak tomatoes or these tomatoes on the vine, they are perfectly fine. You can use them as well. The plum tomato or the Roma tomato just gives it a little sweetness, and it's nice with the kale.
Chef
So
Nick,
I've
real
chopped
quick,
some.
a quick question for you. Are you able to move that kale from the bowl so we can see your cutting board a little bit more? We have a question
Sure.
from the audience. That's perfect. Thank you so much.
You guys can see the questions? Okay. Kevin, we can't see the questions.
Right, it looks like there's a Q&A panel. Okay, so everybody, if you're asking a question tonight, drop it in the live chat so that Chef Nick and friends in the kitchen can see them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the tomatoes I've already chopped, but I wanted you to see how I chop them. So the first thing I do is plum tomatoes and Roma tomatoes are usually pretty long. And so I take the top off first, and then I cut them in half so that we end up with that. And then once I've done that, then I cut them in long strips. And then from there, I chop them this way. It's a pretty easy and simple way to chop the tomatoes without a whole fuss or muss. You don't want to put these into a food processor because you would end up with salsa. And that's not what you want for tonight. You want them to stay pretty firm. So as you cook them, they kind of hold on, and you want the juices to release, but you want the tomato itself to stay intact. So if you put it in a food processor, it just turns into mush. I also have some garlic that I've already chopped. Now that I will put in the food processor. Nobody got time for all of that. I use a lot of garlic every day, and I would go through way too many cloves trying to chop at every time I cook. So I buy the garlic cloves already peeled, and then I put them in a food processor and chop them, and then that way I can just use it as I need it. The other item we have is onions. So I have sliced some onions already, but I just want to show you really quickly the two different ways you can do it. Now, I love onions. So for me, I want to taste the onions. So what I do is I cut them in half, and then I slice them lengthwise, very, very thin. So then they saute up really, really nice. Now, everybody does not love onions. So if you want to add the onion flavor, but not have to bite into a huge piece of onion, we can chop them. So I just slice into the onion a couple times, and then down the side a few times. And then we go this way. And this way, you get a nice chopped onion. And then for someone who is not an onion enthusiast, you get the flavor of the onion, but you don't have to bite on a huge piece of onion. Okay. Now, the other thing I've added is a little bit of veggie stock. So I've already poured it into a container. You can buy veggie stock anywhere, usually in most soup aisles. You want to be careful to get veggie stock and not broth. Veggie stock has less salt in it. It usually has less additives. And when I say additives, I mean other seasonings and other flavors. It's usually the water and the flavor of the vegetables, and that's it. That's what you want in the stock. You don't want a broth, because broths are, like I said, salty, and they usually have additional things, preservatives, particularly to keep them shelf stable. Not so great for you, and they don't taste really well either. So I have vegetable stock here. And then I have some salt and pepper. And mirin. So mirin is a Japanese sweet rice wine. They use it in stir fries. It's used in teriyaki sauces. They use it to help glaze fish. It's delicious. A lot of American markets don't sell pure mirin. So sometimes you'll see this, and it's called Ajah mirin, which is mirin-like. So it has less alcohol and more sugar, so that they can sell it in grocery stores. But if you go to any Asian market, you can find mirin. It's a wonderful accompaniment to vegetables, particularly vegetables that are a little bit more bitter. So kale, even collards, or broccolini or broccoli rabe, it's really nice. So we're going to add a little bit of that today, and it just gives it a nice punch. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to. So we're going to come over to the stove. And what I have is a large saute pan. It's not real deep. I wanted to cook a little bit slower, but I don't want it to saute too fast. So I have a wider pan, and I do have a lid that will help steam it and cook it down a little bit faster. The key when you're sauteing vegetables is that you don't want to overcrowd the pan. So if you have a small saute pan, you want to put less vegetables in. The larger for bigger items, that way you have more surface area. So I have that on a medium-high heat, and I like to get my pan a little bit warm first before we add the onions to saute. You never want to put food into a cold pan, so you have to give it a few minutes. So we're going to give it a few minutes. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions as we move on? No questions? Okay, great.
Chef Nikki, I don't know why the questions aren't going through the chat, but let's see. We have, is there a non-canned replacement for the veggie stock?
So you could use vegetable broth. I would just add water, so it's not so salty. So if the recipe calls for 2 cups of stock, then I would add 1 cup of that, and then a cup of the water. That way it's not because it's a really concentrated flavor. So just adding a lot of it will just make your dish really salty. So you don't want that.
Gotcha. And we also have some love for plum tomatoes in the chat. Trisha says plum tomatoes are the best.
Yes, they are.
And then with the mirin, does that give the, a sweeter flavor, or is it more savory? What can people expect with that?
So actually, you won't taste the sweetness at all. What it does is that because the kale green is a little bit bitter, it just kind of evens the flavor out with the onions and the tomatoes. It's just a great way to kind of balance all the flavors together.
And then Linda asks that she says she has stock. How much water should she add if she has stock and not the veggie broth?
No, stock is what we want.
We want stock. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So the recipe tonight calls for 1 cup of veggie stock. So I would just add a 1/2 cup of the broth and 1/2 cup of water.
And Sabrina says, where do you find it in the store?
The mirin. So the veggie stock is usually in the soup aisle.
The mirin.
The mirin is usually in, if the grocery store has like an international aisle, usually with other Asian items. So like where soy sauce is located or teriyaki sauce, usually you can find the mirin as well. Okay, so the recipe calls for extra virgin olive oil. I use both extra virgin olive oil and what we call a blended oil. When you work in restaurants and hotels for a number of years, you work with chefs who were like the penny pinch. And extra virgin olive oil can be very expensive in a hotel or a restaurant. So we use something called blended oil. And we blend either soybean oil with the extra virgin olive oil or canola oil with extra virgin olive oil. So I make my own here at home. So it's about 15% extra virgin olive oil, and then the rest of it is canola. That's a personal preference, but if you want to use just extra virgin olive oil, you certainly can. If you want to use just canola oil or even grapeseed oil, avocado oil will work well. Those are all perfectly good. You want to make sure that you use an oil that has a high smoking point. And what that means is that when you saute things, that if you turn the heat up, that the oil won't burn. So now that our pan is good and hot.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could one use sake instead?
Yes, you could use sake. Yes. But you would use sake in a different point in the cooking than we're going to use tonight. So first we want to add the onions. If you're going to use sake, so tonight we're going to add the onions, the tomatoes and garlic. We'll add the greens in, and then we'll add the mirin. If you were going to use sake, I would suggest you put the sake in before the greens to kind of let some of the alcohol cook out first, and then I would add the collards. Excuse me, the kale. So I want to get my onions to a nice translucent color before I add my tomatoes and garlic. The important part is that the reason why I layer is that all of these things cook at different temperatures and for different lengths. So if you put everything all in together, something's going to be more cooked than it should. If you overcook the garlic, it will begin to brown too much, and it will give you a burnt flavor once you add the kale, and it's hard to get that flavor out. The tomatoes we'll add next.
So Jennifer asked, what about coconut oil? Does it have a high smoking point for this recipe?
Coconut oil does have a high smoking point. However, for this particular recipe, I wouldn't use coconut oil. Now, I don't want to cook the tomatoes too long because I don't want them to become mush. I just want them to have enough cooked so that as I add the kale, they have the juices start to escape, but the actual shape of the tomato hasn't fallen apart. I'm now going to add my garlic.
Karen said she missed something. Does the garlic go in after the onions?
Yes, I'm adding the garlic right now. Now, I love garlic, so I always add more than what the recipe calls for, but that's just me. And as you can see, the onions have sauteed really nicely. And the tomatoes are holding their shape. And I wish you could smell it. It smells wonderful. And the garlic is now added. So now I'm going to begin to add the kale. Now, this was 2 bunches of kale. So it was 2 of these. Now it looks like a lot right now, but like most leafy greens, once it cooks down, it will not be this much. So if you're cooking for a large family, I would say these 2 bunches are going to probably be enough for about 4 to 6 people. If you have a larger family than that, you're going to need to cook a few more bunches. And I'm going to add it in layers. So I'm going to put enough in to coat the bottom of the pan, put the lid on, and let that cook down. And then I'll add another layer. This way, it won't overflow.
Someone asked what size saute pan is that?
It's a 12-inch saute pan. So I'm going to add that. And I do have a lid. So we're going to lid that and let that cook down. And as it cooks down, we'll add another layer and another layer until we've added all the kale. The most important thing when you cut the kale is that you want all the pieces to be the same size or about the same size. That way it cooks evenly, and you don't get some pieces that are more cooked than others. When you do the layering, it's pretty quickly, so it's not like one layer is going to get cooked faster than the other. You just kind of have to just keep watch over it, because once it starts to steam, it'll cook down relatively quickly. Okay. I am going to move the extra onions. I'll use them for something else. Okay. I like this dish for the holidays because you can prepare this ahead of time. You can do this a week or two in advance. And once it's cooked and cooled down, you can put it in freezer bags and put it in your freezer. And then when it's time to prepare it for your Thanksgiving or your holiday meal, you just take it out the freezer, take it out the bag, put it in a nice stock pot, put a lid on it. You might have to add a little bit more vegetable stock, and in 10 or 15 minutes, your side is ready. So the first layer has already begun to cook down. So I'm just going to stir it up a little bit and add the next layer of kale. All right. All right. So as that begins to cook down, I want to tell you some wonderful fun facts about quiche. Quiche was originally served in America as a brunch item. It is very popular in the 70s and 80s, and then it kind of fell off, but it is making a resurgence and people are in love with quiche again. Tonight we're making a bacon and cheese quiche, but quiche is really open to interpretation. You can make any kind of quiche you like. If you want to do vegetable quiche, you can change it, add any kind of vegetables that you would like. You can even change the cheese. Tonight we're using cheddar and Gruyere, great. Even mozzarella is wonderful. You can add any kind of cheese that you want. There's no rule to how to make a good quiche. The only thing I would suggest is that whatever vegetable you use, if you're using anything that has a lot of water, you want to make sure you squeeze out all the water before you add it to your quiche, because that can create a wobbly, not so yummy quiche. A lot of quiche recipes are varying. So you'll see some that require flour, some will have milk, and some have heavy cream, like our recipe tonight. If you see a recipe that has milk, it almost always has flour, because you need that to kind of help thicken it up and so that the quiche will set. I personally prefer to use the eggs with the cream. It makes a fluffier quiche, and less ingredients for you to add. The base, of course, is eggs. So I just have large eggs. This is a recipe that is worth tried and true. I don't fool with it. This is the base of all quiche, my quiche anyway. I always start with the 6 eggs, and I always have a cup of cream. Now after that, it changes a little bit because I changed the cheese up a little bit, or I changed the ingredients. But this is a personal favorite. I love bacon and cheese. And this recipe has a lot of bacon and a lot of cheese. The other great thing about quiche is that you can freeze it. You can make these ahead of time and freeze them. They hold up in your freezer for about 3 months. And when you're ready to serve them, you just take them out the freezer, unwrap them, pop them in the oven for about 10 minutes or so till they warm through. And voila, you've got a perfectly good quiche ready to go.
Trisha says quiche still rocks around the world.
Yeah, it rocks in my house too. I love quiche. But before we start to put the quiche together, I'm going to add the final layer of kale so that it can cook down while we make our quiche. Now, once I add the final layer, I'm going to add the stock. If you don't add the stock, what will happen is that the bottom layer will begin to stick to the bottom of the pan. And you don't want to do that. There we go. I am going to stir it up a little bit so that I get the onions and the tomatoes all cooked in. Really nice. And before I put the lid, this is where I'm going to add some salt and pepper. I use coarse ground pepper and kosher salt. This is a personal preference of mine. This is what I prefer. But you can use white pepper. You could use mixed color peppercorns and get that flavor. It's just a multiple layer of peppers. That's pretty good too. You can use whatever kind of salt that you want. Just be careful when you're adding salt. You want to do it a little bit at a time. You can always add more. You can never take it away. So are you guys ready for the holiday season? Have you started preparing your menus for the holidays yet? Not yet. You have time. Well, you're running out of time for Thanksgiving, but you got time for the rest of the holiday season. So I have a nice, beautiful Pyrex bowl. This bowl means a lot. It was my grandmother gave it to me. It's one of the bowls that I learned how to cook things in when I was a kid. So I'm so excited and honored that it belongs to me now. It is a classic Pyrex dish. So it is a glass bowl that has been coated. It was something that was very popular in the 60s. Pyrex doesn't make them like this anymore, but it's now my arsenal and I love it.
Yes, Monica said they don't make them like that anymore.
No. So our recipe tonight calls for 6 eggs, a pound of bacon, a cup of heavy cream, a quarter cup of chopped chives, unbaked pie crust shell, half a teaspoon of paprika, 2 cups of sharp cheddar cheese, a half a cup of Gruyere, and salt and pepper to taste. The first thing you will see is this beautifully made pie crust. Now, while I know how to make pie crust from scratch, I do not. Most often I buy them at the grocery store. They come frozen. They have different varieties. I do have a personal favorite. I'm not going to shout them out because they're not paying me. But I like their pie shell because it's always even. It's nice and buttery and flaky, and it's deep. The more shallow pie crust, I feel like they cook the quiche too fast and it burns too quickly on the top. So I like that this one is deep. It's about an 8-inch pie crust. So with a quiche, you don't have to pre-bake your pie crust. You're going to just add the filling and then we'll bake it in the oven.
So I want to ask, how deep is the pie shell?
This pie shell is probably about 1.5 inches deep. I think most pie, well, I won't say most, but a lot of pie crusts are about like 3/4 of an inch. So they're shallow and they're usually 9 inches, not 8. That's the other thing. So I have some eggs. I'm going to start with that. So 6 eggs. I do not use a mixer. I use my hand and a fork. The first part is that you want to mix the cream and the eggs together completely before we add the other ingredients. Because I'm using bacon tonight, I have pre-cooked the bacon and chopped it up. If you were going to use vegetables, so I think of quiche like a very fancy omelet. If you prefer to have your vegetables sauteed before you add the eggs, then I would saute them first. If you want a little crunch with your peppers and onions, then you don't have to. It's a personal preference. There's no rule to it.
Monica is curious, why not use a mixer?
So it's 6 eggs. And I guess for me, this is still the best mixer ever. And you just need to whisk the eggs. And it doesn't take long. And you don't overdo the eggs. I think a lot of times when people make quiche, so when you whisk air into your eggs. And as you whisk the air into the eggs, it makes them lighter and frothier. when you use a electric mixer, sometimes, in my opinion, I believe you add a little too much air and they get too fluffy. And then when you go to cook them in the oven, what happens is you separate your ingredients separate from your egg. So if you ever had a quiche where the all the other ingredients are at the bottom, that's usually what happens. If you were making, 15 or 16 at a time, yeah, go ahead, use that mixer. But for 6 eggs, it's okay. Or if you want to use a whisk, you certainly can do that as well.
Trisha said, can you use a hand whisk?
You can use a hand whisk. Tried and true as well. I guess as a chef, we always keep things simple. So the fork works just fine. And once I whisk the eggs together, and really what I'm looking for is that you don't see any separation between the yolk and the white. Then I'll slowly add the heavy cream. And I just keep whisking until all of the cream and the eggs are incorporated together as one. And you don't see any separation between the cream and the eggs. Now, I have seen many of people who layer in the ingredients and then pour the egg mixture over top. I find that when you do that, it doesn't distribute all of the ingredients evenly. So I always mix them in the bowl first before I pour them into the shell. So the first thing we're gonna add is bacon. So this recipe calls for a pound of bacon. I know that seems like a lot, but if you're a bacon lover, it's never too much.
Question about the eggs. Are you looking for a thin mixture for the eggs or heavy cream?
Heavy cream. Heavy cream. I'm going to add the Gruyere. And I have a mixture of white cheddar and yellow cheddar. That's just what I happen to have in the refrigerator. But if you have all yellow, that's perfectly fine. My chives. Now, the recipe calls for paprika. So you can use regular paprika. I have chosen to use smoked paprika. I love smoked paprika. It gives such an amazing aroma and flavor to your quiche, and it goes so well with the cheese and with the bacon. If you don't have smoked paprika, that's fine. I'm gonna add a little bit of pepper. I'm careful not to add too much salt to my quiche mixture because the cheese has a lot of salt. So I just want enough salt to balance out all of the flavors so that it doesn't, it has a good flavor too. And then I use a rubber spatula.
Question about the cheese. What's the cheddar flavor recommended? Mild, medium, etc.
That's personal preference. I use sharp today because that's what I had, and that's what I particularly love. But if you're not a fan of sharp cheddar and you like your eggs with mild cheddar, by all means, go ahead and add mild cheddar. If you like fontina or mozzarella, go for it. The only suggestion I do have is that you don't add fresh mozzarella. Fresh mozzarella has a lot of water in it, and it will disrupt the texture of your quiche. So the next thing we do is pour in our mixture. Now, I know it looks like it might overflow in the oven, but I promise it will not. Okay. So this is what it should look like before you put it in the oven. It's filled pretty high to the top. You want to cook it on a sheet pan. No judgment. This one's old. So you put your quiche on your sheet pan. We already have an oven that's preheated to 350. So when I bake my quiche, I bake it on conventional oven, not convection. I found with the convection oven, sometimes it burns the crust. It cooks too fast. So with the convention oven, it goes slower and everything seems to cook and melt and happen the way that it's supposed to. Now, this could be all in my mind, but that's my experience. It should go in the oven at 350 for about 35 minutes. In it goes. Okay, we're gonna come back to our kale. Oh man, I wish you guys could smell it. Now I'm gonna add the mirror. Now, our recipe tonight calls for about 2 teaspoons of mirror. So this particular brand, actually both brands that I've used have a pour spout, so that it kind of comes out slow. And I just go around like that. That's enough. And then I just stir it up, just making sure that all the onions and the tomatoes and garlic are in every bite. Okay. They look great. I'm gonna pull it off just so you guys can see what it looks like. So by now you see it's changed color a bit. It's not that bright, vibrant green. It's starting to cook down a little bit. It's still a little bit of juice rolling around in there, so that's good. Nothing is sticking or burning to the bottom of the pan. At this point, your heat should be at medium. And it needs probably about 5 more minutes. We'll leave that lid on. Do you guys have any questions? You guys are all stars. You're rocking it out. So one of the other questions I get asked all the time is why kale over collards? And it's not kale over collards. I just like kale. Doesn't matter. I still make collards for my family because they love them and they enjoy them. But kale is good too. And I like them with the tomatoes, the mirror. It's just a nice touch, something different. And it's simple and easy to cook. And it's ready within like 15, 20 minutes. I think it's great. I can't see what Corinne's asking me.
What is the order of what you put in the pie crust?
What was the order? Oh, so I mixed the eggs and the cream first, whisk them together. I'm sorry, I whisked the eggs first, then I add in the cream, and then I whisk them together. Then I add the bacon, the cheese, the chives. There's no particular order to how you add the ingredients to the bowl, and then I mix them all together, and then I pour it all into the pie crust. Again, you'll see some recipes that call for you to put the ingredients in first and pour the eggs over top of it. I just feel like when you mix it all together, you evenly distribute all of the different flavors that are in your quiche, in the quiche, before it goes into the oven. So you get every bite has a little bit of everything you want. A little cheese, a little bacon, a little chives. It's wonderful. Yeah, okay, great. Well, thanks to modern technology, voila, the quiche is made. So there you are. There is my beautiful quiche. So perfectly golden brown. I'm going to get a knife and a plate, and we're going to cut a slice. Now, just like birthday cake, the first piece is always
Monica said that looks so good.
I can't wait. And I just hope that the first piece comes out good. That's always my fear when I cut into it, is that the first piece won't come out good. I always use a spatula and try my very best to get under so that I get out the perfect slice, and maybe, almost. Isn't she pretty? What do you think? Yeah. I'm gonna try not to overdo it. Just take small bites. Oh, look at all the cheese. Oh, that's beautiful. Wow.
You got a little something right now.
Yeah.
Can it ever be too cheesy?
No such thing as too much cheese in my book. Oh my goodness. That's wonderful. Now, if you're someone who likes cheese but doesn't love cheese, instead of putting in the 2 cups of sharp and half a cup of Gruyere, what you can do is put a cup and a half of the sharp cheese and half a cup of the other cheese. Or you can even go 1 cup and 1 cup. That will still be enough cheese. This recipe does call for a lot of cheese. But I was a rat in my former life. So this is perfect for me. The bacon is crisp and still yummy. The smoked paprika has a nice smoky flavor. I think it's delicious, if I do say so myself.
Danielle says yes, she loves cheese.
Okay. All right. We can take a look at our kale. Got another bowl and spoon. Oh yeah. I'm so sorry you guys can't smell it, because it smells wonderful. Another fork. And there you have it. That's what it should look like. And if you're uncertain, taste it. Don't burn yourself though. I've done that so many times. Oh my gosh, delicious. It's perfect. You know the kale is done when you bite into it and it's nice and tender. If it's still hard to bite into the leaf, when you can still bite, it's like hard to bite into the stalk, it's not ready.
Monica said, did the tomatoes cook down?
So I don't know if you can see them. Can you see the tomatoes?
Yeah.
So they're still
whole.
they're still whole. And that's why it's important that you cook the onions down first, then add the tomatoes. Because if you add the tomatoes at the same time as the onions, what happens is that the tomatoes become complete mush. That is not good. So do you guys have more questions for me?
She said good to know.
Fantastic. Well, I do hope that you all have gotten 2 new dishes to add to your repertoire, to try something new for this holiday season. It has been my pleasure. If you guys don't have any more questions. No more? Okay, fantastic.
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, they just said thank you.
Okay. Well, it has been my pleasure to be in your kitchens and living rooms and offices for this evening. I pray that you eat well and have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you, Chef Nikk. Thank you, everybody.